Before this conflict, every nation on Earth trembled at the prospect of facing an army as powerful and experienced as the Russian one. But the Russian military was shown in its true light by the Ukrainian army, and the events of the war disproved everything that had been learned about the Russian military in the years leading up to the conflict. It can be seen from every vantage point that the Russian army is completely helpless. Let's examine how the Russian Army and Navy have responded to the recent developments at sea. On the 24th of February, a meeting of the Ukrainian parliament resulted in the passing of a new resolution. This decision was made in relation to the agreements that Ukraine had made with Russia regarding the Sea of Azov. The Ukrainian parliament and the Ukrainian government have decided to note all of the agreements that they have previously made with Russia regarding the Sea of Azov. These cooperation agreements regarding the use of the Kerch Strait in the Sea of Azov were cancelled out of frustration with the lack of results by a unanimous vote of 303 representatives. The Ukrainian member of parliament announced the new information using the following: all previous agreements with Russia regarding the Sea of Azov have been terminated by the parliament. These decisions regarding the Sea of Azov and the Court Bridge could be a precursor to future maritime conflicts. The losses that the Russian army experienced in the air and on the ground during the war cannot be matched, and the losses that the Russian army experienced at sea are also sign. The loss of Russia's largest war in April was, without a doubt, the single most significant blow to the maritime capabilities of the Russian armed forces. It was the Moscow cruiser, the largest war in the Black Sea Fleet of the Russian Navy, that fell victim to this attack that was carried out by the Ukrainian army using its domestically produced missiles, the Neptune anti-ship missiles. The explosion caused by these missiles was success. In order to conceal the fact that they had been victorious in their attack, the Ukrainian military sent a Moscow cruiser that had been equipped with air defense systems and then used drones to disable those systems before sinking the ship. According to reports from Russia, the blaze that caused the ship to sink was started by the munitions that were on. This explanation provided by the Russian authorities turned out to be false, as it was disputed by officials from the Russian Navy as well as those who were on board. The fact that the Ukrainian military was responsible for the ship sinking should not have been in any way surprising. One of the largest warships in the Russian army was destroyed in the attack, which is believed to have resulted in the deaths of nearly 600 members of the Russian. This was a major setback for the Russian military. The Ukrainian army was responsible for organizing this attack, which ultimately led to the defeat of the Russian army. In addition to these vessels, the Russian army also lost a number of other ships. After detonating the Moscow cruiser, the Ukrainian army was able to successfully sink the auxiliary ships of the Moscow cruiser, which were the Admiral Makov and the Admiral. During this operation, the Ukrainian army utilized boats that were loaded with explosives and controlled by remote control. These boats were able to bury two important ships belonging to the Russian Navy in the depths of the ocean. The Ork, which was one of the most important landing ships in the Russian Navy's fleet, was also destroyed. The Ukrainian military was able to successfully complete the mission, which involved using missiles to sink the. As the missiles struck the ship, a massive fire broke out, and the Ukrainian Navy shared images of this fire on social media. The Russian Black Sea Fleet's Ork landing ship was reportedly damaged after being struck in the occupied port of Bsk. According to a statement released by the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense regarding the split, the Russian military landed on Snake Island in March and occupied it because of its location off the coast of Ode. Because of its proximity to the city, the island held significant strategic value. A significant setback for the Ukrainian army was the occupation of this island, which allowed for easier control of air and sea traffic in the northwestern part of the Black Sea. However, the Ukrainian army did not capitulate to the Russian invaders on the Snake Island, and as a result, it achieved one of its most significant victories. The Ukrainian military successfully retook control of the island by reclaiming Snake Island in June, with the assistance of long-range missiles that were provided by countries located in the West and Europe. A significant amount of additional damage was inflicted on the Russian Navy in the region of Sevastopol. The port of Sevastopol, which is home to the Black Sea Fleet, was once the site of one of the most vital military installations for the Russian. However, the Ukrainian military used kamikaze drones, which completely obliterated the area. The Ukrainian army was able to successfully sign the Sarata Treaty of the Black Sea Fleet with missiles during another operation. In addition, the ship Novojarkovsky as well as the Caesarkov were both destroyed by successful military strikes conducted by the Ukrainian. The Ukrainian army is having remarkable success everywhere the conflict is taking place, and Russia is continuing to suffer enormous losses. As a result of these victories, the Russian military appears unable to prevent further casualties despite having already suffered the loss of its most important ships within the first year of the conflict. According to Rear Admiral Mike Stuman, commander of the United States Office of Naval, the following is what he had to say about the achievements of the Ukrainian military at sea and the decline in strength of the Russian Navy. You have witnessed the decline in effectiveness of Russia's naval forces. This is due to the fact that Ukrainians are becoming more skilled at aiming and using the weapons that we supply them with. The Russians' ability to maneuver has been severely constrained as a result of the Ukrainians' efforts, which has allowed them to improve their own. There is no way that the Western and European countries' combined 8th Fleet can defeat the Russian Navy that is being sent to Ukraine, weakened to an even greater degree by today. Huge casualties have been sustained by the Russian Navy while they were at sea, and the number of Russian service members killed in action has surpassed 150,000. Everyone around the world can see how exhausted Russia is getting in the early stages of the. Putin did not anticipate that his forces would sustain such significant casualties. He even entertained the notion that he could accomplish what he desired in a relatively short amount of time. However, within a short period of time after the war began, Russia became one of the most sanctioned countries in the world, with dozens of other countries also being sanctioned. In addition to its failures on the battlefield, Russia was also on the verge of an economic. The already high rate of inflation skyrocketed, and the distribution of goods was severely disrupted. During the time that Putin was attempting to find answers to these problems, he was also dealing with major issues in his own country and with his own people. Since the very first days of the conflict, the Russian people have been rebelling against Putin's decision to invade, and this discontent on the part of the people has only grown stronger as more time has. Putin's inability to make a rational decision is changing the minds of even those who were previously on his side. Despite the fact that the Russian army has suffered losses, protests and demonstrations are being organized on almost every street in Russia in the hope that the occupation will soon be brought to an end. Putin has not listened to any of the Russian people's responses, and as a result, the deaths of thousands of young Russians have been. This is despite the fact that the Russian people have voiced their opinion numerous times. The issues that have been plaguing the Russian armed forces have also contributed to a great deal of disorder. The vast majority of Russian troops have expressed reluctance to engage in combat with Ukraine and are reportedly looking into potential surrender options despite having ordered all of Russia's military personnel to be mobile. Vladimir Putin has been unable to solve the personnel shortage that has plagued the Russian military in its fight against the Ukrainian army. Putin is resorting to sending soldiers from private companies and Chechen soldiers to the battlefield as a last-ditch effort. However, these soldiers are also encountering significant challenges at the front. Recent events have demonstrated that they will not remain on the battlefield for an extended period of time. What are your reactions and thoughts to the recent events after conducting your analysis of the decision made by the Ukrainian parliament? What are your thoughts on the gradual depletion of the Russian Navy's capabilities? What are your thoughts on Putin's continued occupation after you interpret it, even after so many losses? Do not overlook the opportunity to share your thoughts and opinions in the comment. The covert operation that was being carried out in the backwards by Russian leader Vladimir Putin was exposed by the Ukrainian intelligence service. Occupying Russian troops in Ukraine made an attempt to ambush the Ukrainian army, but instead found themselves ambushed by the Ukrainian army. The conflict that raged between Russia and Ukraine has finally come to an end 1 year after taking control of the city of Saul. The occupying Russian forces have shifted their focus to the city of Bahamas as the primary target of their aggression after being forced to retreat from Salvador. The Ukrainian army is currently attempting to regroup in the surrounding woods. The Ukrainian army continues to defend the city of Bakhmut against the assaults launched by Russian forces because they do not want to risk losing the. Vladimir Zelensky, the leader of the Ukrainian state, has issued a statement regarding this matter. In it, he claims that the Ukrainians will not hand over the city of Bakhmut to the occupying Russian forces and that the city of Sadar will be freed from Russian occupation. Even though the Russian army had already taken control of the city of Salvador, the Ukrainian army was forced to retreat after being confronted by the Russian army and the mercenaries from the Vanner, who had just entered the city. The number of lives lost in this area is shockingly high. According to the statement made by the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, the number of Russian service members killed in Sor alone was over 10,000. It is now believed that more than 800 Russian soldiers lose their lives each day. On the backside of the Ukrainian army continues to organize airstrikes against Russian forces that are attempting to attack backward with missiles that it has placed in the city of Bakhmut. The vast majority of the Russian commanders that Valery Ov dispatched to the city of Badmouth. They were the head of the Russian General Staff as well as the commander of the Russian army that was stationed on Ukrainian territory when they were. In recent weeks, it came to light that one of Vladimir Putin's favorite commanders, Georgy Shava, passed away in Blackwood. Shavia was known as Georgy Shavia. The Ukrainian army was successful in removing the Russian commander from the battlefield by launching an artillery assault on a building in which Russian soldiers were stationed in the opposite direct. In order to take the city of Badmouth more quickly, the Russian army has established a number of command centers and military bases in the Sor region. The Ukrainian intelligence service is exerting a great deal of effort to discover the location of these covert bases in Sor when the covert bases have been discovered. The Ukrainian armed forces intend to conduct airstrikes against the facilities housing these military. Solidarity is often referred to as an underground city due to its extensive network of tunnels. These tunnels reach all the way to the city of Badmut and they start in Sor. The Russian army, which was successful in seizing Sor, had intended to set up a large ambush for the Ukrainian army using these tunnels. However, thanks to the successful operation of the Ukrainian army, Russian soldiers were killed while exploring the tunnels beneath the city. These tunnels were going to be used by the occupying Russian forces as a way to enter the city of Beechwood and then escape. Behind the lines held by the Ukrainian armies, frontline Russian soldiers had the intention of entrapping Ukrainian soldiers. However, the opposite occurred and the Ukrainian army was successful in entrapping Russian forces. The Russian Special Forces team, which consisted of approximately 300 people, entered the underground tunnels and began a covert operation in order to get out from behind the Ukrainian front line. The Maxar radar technology that the United States provided to Ukraine was responsible for detecting the individuals as they entered after the Russian soldiers were located in the tunnels by the radar because of the vibrations they emitted while the Ukrainian troops took action against them. A hasty decision was made by the commanders of the Ukrainian troops stationed in Bakhmut to bomb the underground tunnels, and they gave the order to do so. The Ukrainian army had surrounded the point where the underground tunnel emerged into the surface and the Russian army kept pushing forward through the underground tunnel system tunnels. The Ukrainian army had placed plastic explosives on top of the underground tunnels, but they were unaware of what was about to take place at the same time. The plan was to trap the Russian soldiers inside the tunnel by placing mortars in the area around the tunnel before beginning the operate. The initial shots were fired by Ukrainian soldiers at plastic explosives. After that, they began their assault on the underground tunnels by firing mortars and dropping bombs from above. The land that was on top of the underground tunnels began to give way. All of a sudden, a Russian Special Forces team consisting of 300 soldiers was figuratively trapped in the tunnel. The Ukrainian soldiers who were killed also detonated a bomb at the tunnel's exit point on the opposite side of the passageway, which blocked Russian troops from entering additional tunnels. 300 Russian soldiers were killed during this operation that was organized by the Ukrainian army and took place in the underground tunnels. If the plan that the Russian soldiers had devised had been carried out, the line of defense that the Ukrainian army had formed on the back rather than would have been rendered ineffective. The failure of this operation carried out by the Russian army resulted in significant repercussions for the Kremlin. The death toll was 300. Vladimir Putin is dissatisfied with all of the Russian soldiers. The fact that these soldiers were members of Russia's special forces made Putin's experience even more excruciating. The Kremlin is currently experiencing internal strife as a direct result of the failures of the Russian armed forces on the battlefield. Putin is adamant that the city of Beechwood should be occupied despite the fact that many senior officials believe that it was unnecessary to occupy the city of Bakhmut. It is common knowledge that Vladimir Putin is in possession of a great number of other covert. The leader of Russia is currently sending his own agents to various countries in an effort to gather intelligence in a number of countries, most notably Ukraine. It has come to light in recent months that a Russian intelligence operative has been following Ukrainian service members as they train in Germany. The Russian agent was using a drone to attack Ukrainian service members who were training at the headquarters of the German army in order to gather intelligence regarding the type of instruction they were receiving. Following the observation of a drone by the German soldiers, an extensive search of the surrounding area was conducted. Nevertheless, the Russian agent was not located despite all of the efforts that were made, and another Russian agent was just recently. The Russian agent that was captured in Ukrainian territory even admitted that he was working under assignment from the Russian intelligence service. This Russian agent, who was supposed to report the coordinates of energy infrastructure facilities on Ukrainian territory to the Russian military, was apprehended at an infrastructure facility in Kiev. His mission was to report the coordinates of energy infrastructure facilities on Ukrainian T while attempting to obtain information about the infrastructure facility. The Russian agent was apprehended by the Ukrainian soldiers who had been tailing him for a significant amount of time. The informant, who was transported to the headquarters of the Ukrainian army because questioning is linked to a significant number of assaults carried out by the Russian. It was discovered that this Russian agent was responsible for transmitting the coordinates of the attacks that the Russian army had conducted over the past few months on a facility in Kiev that was responsible for energy infrastructure. It was discovered that the attack that had been carried out in the most recent few months by Russian forces and Kharkov had also been carried out by this Russian agent. According to the information that was, Ukrainian soldiers who were stationed in an abandoned building in Kharkov suddenly became vulnerable to airstrikes that were conducted by the Russian army. It was discovered that the captured Russian agent had transmitted the coordinates of this particular building to someone else. When Russian President Vladimir Putin was unable to achieve the level of effectiveness he desired from the Russian military operating on Ukrainian territory, he began to turn to alternative strategy. According to the Ukrainian intelligence service, Vladimir Putin dispatched a large number of Russian agents to Ukraine. Putin, who was concerned that the Russian army has suffered so many casualties, is resorting to such methods in order to harm Ukraine. The Russian army has been fighting in eastern Ukraine since April. The number of Russian soldiers killed in action in Ukraine has now surpassed 1,150,000. The loss of this many soldiers has caused significant harm to the Russian armed forces. It was also learned that the majority of these soldiers who died were the ones that Putin included in the army. Putin was responsible for their recruitment, even though officials from the Russian opposition stated that Russian citizens who were included in the army as a result of the decision to partially mobilize were not well trained and had no prior experience with war. Vladimir Putin continued to send his own citizens to Ukraine. This was done despite the fact that the decision to partially mobilize included them in the fact that these soldiers have no prior combat experience and are completely ignorant of the realities of war makes it all the more fascinating that they are serving on the front lines. By placing these inexperienced soldiers on the front lines, Russian commanders are figuratively pushing these soldiers to take their own lives. The Russian people are very upset about the current situation, and as a result, they have a lot of anger directed toward Vladimir. Now it is being said that Vladimir Putin will make another decision regarding the mobilization of forces. In the event that Vladimir Putin issues another call for the country to be mobilized, it is inevitable that the Russian people will take to the streets. A decision along these lines could spark a significant uprising in Russia. You can show your support for us by subscribing to the most strategically significant clash triangle in the annals of world, which can be found in the southern region of Ukraine while the bloodiest fighting is taking place in and around Donbass. The location of the Crimean Peninsula is the primary factor that contributed to the decision to place the core of the strategy in the southern region of Ukraine. In other words, while hundreds of thousands of shells and missiles are being wasted in the eastern part of Ukraine, mind games are taking place in the southern part of the. So what steps is the Ukrainian military taking at this juncture to retake control of the Crimean Peninsula and the southern front lines? What kind of effect did the fighting and offensive operations that took place in the south of Ukraine this week have on the larger picture of the war? Has the length of the war been cut down? Or were the Russians on the verge of surrendering earlier than expected? For this video content that we have the answers to all of your, along with all of the striking details that accompany them are waiting for you prepared with great care. Let's get the most recent, accurate and official information before we delve into the Devil's Triangle in the southern part of Ukraine. First things first, let's talk about the explosions that have been going on in Dnipro this past week. Recent events saw an explosion take place at an airport in the city of Milo, which is located in the Zaporizhzhia region of Ukraine. The explosion took place around 1,300 hours according to the announcement made by the mayor of Melitopol, Evan Fedorov. According to the reports, the explosions caused damage to the Russian military base, and there is still a significant risk of additional attacks occurring in the. In addition, Fedorov recalled that during the year that Russian forces occupied Melitopol, the airport where the Russian military base was located, experienced dozens of explosions. The Russian authorities have placed the blame for these explosions on the Ukrainian army. Did the Ukrainians realize that the first stage of their plans for the Chian Peninsula, which is located in a strategic region of the war, involved the Chian P? Let's move on to the most recent attacks in Crimea so that we can get a better understanding of the answer to this question. Igor Chenko, the spokesperson for the Russian Ministry of Defense, reported that Ukraine carried out a massive attack on the Crimean Peninsula with unmanned aerial vehicles. He noted that 6 Ukrainian UAVs were shot down by Russian air defense systems, and 4 Ukrainian UAVs were neutralized with electronic warfare. However, Konov noted that there were no casualties or destruction as a result of the attacks. Since a few weeks ago, Ukrainians have not stopped using drones to conduct surveillance and attack operations against the peninsula. In addition to airstrikes, serious military efforts are being made by the Ukrainian armed forces in order to open up land corridor to crime. For this, let's move on to the region of Army Ants, which is situated on the border between Crimea and the mainland, and Kursk on the offensive. A few days ago, Ukrainian forces carried out operations in this area, which resulted in a great deal of noise. It is common knowledge that the potential for an attack still exists in Army Ants, which is distinguished by the fact that it serves as a military base for the long-range missiles known as HIMARS that are operated by Ukrainian artillery units. Let's move on to the region of the Dinaray Islands now, which is included in the ambitious plans that the Ukrainians have for the Chian Peninsula. Let's look at an important modular offensive. There is concern according to the operation plan for the Ukrainian forces in the archipelago located in the region of the Dinaray Islands. That fighting is still taking place at this time by destroying the total of 8 Russian boats on the southwestern bank of the Dinaray. Over the course of the past few days, the Ukrainians were able to achieve their goal of preventing the Russians from reaching the coast from the island. Because they were prevented from going on a reconnaissance mission, the Russians were forced to remain in this archipelago for a significant amount of time. On the other hand, the Ukrainians have not ceased their attacks on the invaders and are doing everything in their power to thwart any plans the Russians may have to escape this area and regain control. These skirmishes involve participation from Ukrainian Special Naval Commandos in addition to the regular Ukrainian armed forces stationed in the Dnipro Islands region. In addition, Ukrainian forces have recently targeted Russian attack groups in person as well as their attacks in the Dnipro Islands region. As was mentioned earlier, one ingenious component of Kiev's war strategy consisted of establishing a connection corridor between Crimea and Kars. Even when the Russians were unable to get support from their troops stationed in the region of the Dnipro Islands, they were forced to scale back their operations and continue on. On the other hand, as Ukraine moved closer to implementing its step-by-step plans for a Maj, or offensive operation in Crimea, the Kherson and Dnipro triangle began to spread to Mariupol at this time. It's possible that Ukrainian forces are making preparations to launch GMLRS missiles against the invaders in Mariupol. However, this can be a very dangerous undertaking to undertake. Not only the nature of, but also the Ukrainian armed forces were responsible for determining these dangers. The attack on the logistics facilities in Mariupol, which were temporarily occupied by the Russian on February 2, 2023, made a lot of noise because, for example, after this attack, there were speculations in the information space that Ukraine had already supplied the GLDSB long-range missile systems with a firing range of up to 150 kilometers. This was one of the many factors that affected the readiness for the operation. In addition to, a number of official speakers started implying that there are now more opportunities for the Ukrainian armed forces in order to attack the invaders in Mariupol. But in this section, samples of weapons that already exist may already be used by the Ukrainian armed forces. GMLRS guided missiles are fired from the M270 or M142 Hi-H with a firing range of up to 84 kilometers and the ability to engage multiple. According to Mariupol's plans, Mars may end up being the most important player in Ukraine. If you measure it on the map, then it is only a little more than 50 miles from the front line to the Russian object in the temporarily occupied Mariupol, and the mere fact that this distance exists alone will make it possible to fire the GMLRS along the ridges in this area at a range of up to 84 kilo. However, given that our rocket artillery will have to approach the front line closer than usual, this must be a very high-stakes operation. In turn, we will add that the success of this or that operation with a missile attack on the rear of the invaders actually depends on a number of different factors in addition to a particular one, type of weapon, but also on a number of other factors that, as we have mentioned, should also be examples. The existence of suitable routes for rapid entry and exit to the location, the intensity of our air defense system that does not allow the invaders to take over our systems, and the weakness of the Russian air defense system that can miss our missiles are some of the factors that need to be considered in this. In this regard, some of the factors that need to be considered include the type of weapon, but also the existence of suitable. On the other hand, it would appear appear that yet another surprise is in store for the Ukrainian army with regard to the GMLRS, according to statements made by U.S. Army Secretary Christine Wout. The service, they signed more contracts for the guided multiple launch rocket system. The following, in conjunction with an event held by the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, during which the United States continues to increase its production of munitions in an effort to assist Ukraine in its fight against the Russian invasion. WMH stated that, for instance, looking at the GMLRS to really increase our acquisition, he hopes that we will be able to complete 2 modular contracts in the following. Despite the fact that they are only produced in limited quantities, the Ukrainian army currently employs a greater number of range-guided rockets than those that are launched from HIMARS. When compared to the M30 rockets launched by HIMARS, the VECAM is capable of reaching targets located 173 kilometers away with a warhead that is significantly more. Artillery rocket with a length of 7.6 meters and a designation of VECAM. It is a modified version of the Soviet BM-30 Smerch multiple launch rocket system. According to Ivan Vanik, the first vice president of the National Association of the Defense Industry of Ukraine, the VECAM has a range of 110 kilometers and a warhead with a diameter of 300 millimeters and a weight of 485 pounds that can hit target. Vec also added great accuracy to their sensitivity, which was enhanced by gas rudders, which are multiple small holes that emit propellant and are used to guide the missile to the target using GPS. VIC also added great accuracy. On the other hand, despite the fact that the VECAM is supposed to be very accurate and sensitive ammunition, the level of accuracy that it actually possesses is currently unknown. The occupied city of Mary, which is located on the Sea of Uf, was hit by multiple explosions over the course of 2 nights during the previous week. These explosions took place approximately 80 kilometers away from the nearest Ukrainian territory groups. Despite the fact that a limited number of vignettes have been produced so far, this information will not be disclosed even though it is possible that the GMLRS was used in these. The VECAM gives the Ukrainian military access to ammunition that has a range that is 36% greater and more than twice as much payload as the GMLRS. Then you make an announcement that you intend to modify the VECAM so that it has a range of 150 kilometers more than it currently does. VNAC declined to specify when exactly the longer range variants might be ready or how many will be.